Now we are able to sign up, log in, and log out. The next thing that we'd like to add, just fetch these users for our sidebar, and we will call all of them as conversations. Now for this, we would like to use a global state, and for this we could use something called Zustand. So let's search for it, and it is this one. So the reason that we'd like to use this is just to have a global state that we could use in our entire application. So that's what we did while we using this context. So here we are able to get these value in our entire application. But I just want to show you there is other alternatives other than context. That's why I will be using this. So let's go into the documentation. So here's the installation. Let's grab this command, copy it, and paste it into our terminal. So I'll just create a new one that'll be inside the front end, and just paste this. So npm install Zustand, and while it is happening, let's create a file inside the source, call it as Zustand, or maybe we could call it as store, but I'll go with Zustand. And then here we'd like to have a global state, and this is how it works. Now we will have a file called useConversation.js, and here we need to first get the create function from Zustand, and then we'll say const useConversation. That's called the create function, and it gets the set as an argument in this callback. And then we will just return an object, and that's going to be our global state. Now that should be an object where we'll just say selected conversation. By default, it's going to be null, and we'll have a setter function for this. So let's say set selected conversation, and this is going to take the selected conversation as an argument, and then it is going to call the setter function and just update this state with it. So basically this is the exact same thing where we just use something like useState. We have the state and setter function, and that's basically the same thing. And then we will have the messages state. By default, it's going to be an empty array, and then set messages that will take the messages and then set this state with the new messages. And then at the end of this file, we could just say export default this use conversation. And once we use it, I think that's going to be pretty clear. Now we would like to create a hook to fetch these conversations from our database. And we have created a controller for this, which was this one, right? Get users for sidebar. That's going to get us every single user, but not the authenticated user. So we are going to go into the sidebar first, and we have these conversations, and that's going to be the place we would like to call our hook. So it's going to be something like use maybe get conversations, and let's create this hook now. I'll just go into my hooks folder and create it. Use get conversations.js. And here we'll have again loading state, etc. So let's say RAFCE and delete this part. So we have the loading state by default, or the initial value will be false. And then we will have, let's say, const conversations, and then set conversations, we'll say, and that's going to be an empty array for now. And then inside the use effect, so this will immediately run and send a fetch request, and this will run only once. That's why we just put this as an empty dependency array. And then inside here, let's create a function const get conversations. That's going to be an async function. And then here we will just have a try catch, and even before we try, let's say set loading to be true, so that we could show a loading spinner. And in the try, we'll say const res, and we'll just send a fetch request to our endpoint. So it was /API slash users, and that's going to be get request, so we don't need to put any options. Then we'll get the data res.json, and we'll say if there is any errors, just throw it so that we could just catch it in our catch block. So we'll just say toast.error and error.message, and finally we'll say set loading to be false, and here we'll just say set this state to be the data, and we need to call this function so that we could execute this code. And I think that's going to be it for this hook. We'll just return the loading state as well as the conversations. Now let's go here, import this one, and we'll get the loading state as well as the conversations. Now if we just console log it, and let's just say conversations, and let's try to see that in console. If we just refresh, now we have the conversations. So we have 8 users in our database, right? In total, we have 8 users, but we got only 7. It's because it is excluding the current authenticated user. So we just see every single user in this array, but not ourselves. And we would like to now show their full name as well as their profile pic on this left-hand side. So let's go and do it. And also we have this loading state for a second. And for this, we could show some loading spinner. So I will delete this part for now. And I will say, actually, I'll just copy and paste it. So I will just say if it is loading, show this loading spinner for a second. But if it is not loading, then just return null. And here we'll just say conversations. That should be a lowercase. Dot map get each conversation, and for all of them return this conversation component that we had. So we need to pass a key. So key conversation.id. So this key has to be unique. That's why if we just pass the ID, that's going to be unique for each conversation. And then we would like to just send the conversation itself, which is going to be this object. It's going to be this object where we have the full name, gender, and profile pic, as well as the username. And then we could go and just say something like, we would like to show some emoji. For all of them, that's going to be auto-generated. And I just wanted to add this so that this application looks a bit fun or exciting, whatever you want to call it. And for this, I have created a function. So let's go inside the source and create a folder called utils. And inside this utils, I'll just say a file called emojis.js. And now if we just paste this, you can grab this from GitHub repo. So we have about 55 or 50 emojis. So they are generated by JWT, and this basically gets you a random emoji depending on this random function. So you could save this one, and then we'll just send an emoji, and we could call that function now. So we'll say return an emoji for each conversation, and just say get random emoji. That's going to give us a random emoji. And we also need to return something called last index. And the reason is, now I'll show you in a second. So let's get the index. So if index is equal to the conversations.length -1, that means this is the last index. And the reason is that we're using this last index. If you carefully take a look at here, we have this divider after each conversation, but not the last one. So for this, we will check if this is the last index. We are not going to show that divider, and that's the reason we have it. Now let's go into the conversation and just take this props. So we will save this file, and let's close everything to the right, and we'll open up this conversation. Now we would like to get those props, which was the conversation, and I think the last index, as well as the emoji. And here we'll just return that emoji. That was the prop that we have. And for the full name, we'll just say conversation.fullname. and then we will update the profile pic. So I will delete this source, and that's going to be the conversation dot profile pic, and that was not URL, but that's how we call it in our backend. And then at the very end, I will just wrap this. So I'll just cut this for a second, and I'll say if it is not last index, only then show this part. So if it is not last index, and I will paste it. Okay, it is this thing that we have, which was that divider. And if we save now, hopefully everything should work fine. And here we can see we have John, Bob, Jane, just every user, and we even have this so the scroll bar when they just overflows, and we got random emojis for each of them. And now we have this online status, even though that's not correct, but we will fix it when we implement the socket. And now what I want to add is when I click to this, I would like to have this background as this color. And for this, we could use our state that we just created. So let's go here. That was the use conversation that is coming from our JWT folder. And now here is how we can extract values. So we'll just say const and selected conversation and set selected conversation. So these are these values that we have in this file. So selected conversation, setter function of it, and messages, set messages. These are the values that we can get. And now we will basically just check. So let's say const is selected, and we will say if the selected conversation ID is equal to the current conversation ID, then this is going to be true. And if this is true, we will just update the background color. So for this, we'll just go into this div. I will first make this backticks, and we need to add curly braces, then make this backticks, and then just make it, just close the curly braces. And then we will here just say, if this is selected, I'll say $. If it is selected, then add this class where it's going to be BG sky of 500. But if it is not selected, then just leave, just skip that class. And if we save this now, hopefully that's gonna work. But how are we gonna make it selected? Because currently this is empty, right? By default, that value is null. We need to somehow call this function, and we will be calling this when we click to this div. So we'll say on click, we'll just call the selected conversation method, the setter function, and just pass the conversation. Now let's save this and we'll understand that in a second. Now if I click to this, then this function will run, and it is going to set this conversation to be this one, and then this will be true because the selected conversation ID will be equal to this conversation ID, and it is going to give us this background of sky 500. And now if I click to this has been selected. If I click to this, it is going to switch, and it is just working as expected. So now what we would like to do, when there is a selected conversation, we would like to change this view where we would like to fetch our messages between us and this user. So whoever the selected user, that is going to fetch the messages between us. So let's try to do it, and hopefully now you see the advantage of using this global state. In any file, we just call this hook, and we're able to use any values that we'd like to have. So we don't really need to pass this as a props in different components. So wherever you want to use it, we just call this hook and just get the values. And now let's try to fetch messages. So before we try to fetch messages, actually let's go into the message container component that we had. So it is going to be this one, where for now we are just having this hard-coded value, but instead we'll use our global state that we had. So we will say use conversation that is coming from JWT folder that we had, and then that's going to give us the selected conversation as well as the setter function. Now instead of this hard-coded value, we'll just say if there is not selected conversation, then show this placeholder component that we had. But if it is not the case, then just show this this part of the file. So let's save and let's go here. Now there is selected conversation. That's why we see this part. Now I'll refresh. Now there is no selected conversation. We see this component. If I select one, it is gonna update. And if I select this one, here we see that this part doesn't change. So let's update it. Instead of this hard-coded value, we'll just say, let's close the curly braces and we'll just say selected conversation dot full name. And now if we save it, hopefully it's gonna work. So now is Bob is selected, Jane is selected, Daisy, John, and it just changed depending on that state. Now we have one problem. So when I log out, I would like to this state just to reset, and now it doesn't. So now Jack is selected, and if I log out and if I log back in, Jack is still selected, and I want to fix it. I just want to reset it when this component unmounts. And unmounting means basically when this component no longer is in the browser, so no longer it is in the view. So we'll say use effect, and let's initialize it. Now in order to have this unmount state or to use it, we use this return function, and this is called as cleanup function. So we'll just say set selected conversation to be null on cleanup. So, and I'll just put a comment that says unmounts. And let's have this set selected conversation. And now if we save, that's gonna fix it. Now John, or let's say Jane, is selected. I'll log out. Now this will run because component unmounted, right? It is not in the view. So this function run, and now our selected conversation is null. And if we try to log back in, we are not going to see that. So state has been resetted, so we see this part. And now what we'd like to do is add this functionality where we can add sent messages. And for this, I will create one hook. So let's say use send message.js, and then we will be calling this inside the message input component. So first, let's close these, maybe the sidebar, login, and the conversations. We will open up the input, so message input, and when we submit this, we're gonna call the function that we'll have in this file. So here we're gonna have again the loading state, loading, set loading, and let's get the use state, and then we would like to use that Zustand, the global state, use conversation, and we would like to get a couple of different values. So we would like to get the messages, set messages, setter function, and then the selected conversation. Now we'll be using all of them in this file. So we're gonna have this function called send message. It's gonna be an async function, and now this is gonna take the message as an argument. So we will, when we call this function inside our message input, we will add this input value, which is gonna be our message, and we're just grabbing it here. So we'll say try catch, and finally, as always, now set loading will be true, and the finally that's going to be false in the catch, toast.error message, and then in the try we will actually try to call our endpoint. So const res await fetch, and our endpoint was, let's open up backticks because that's going to be some dynamic value. So it was /API/messages and /sent, if you remember, and then we need to pass an ID here, and that ID will be the selected conversation ID, which is the user ID. So whatever we select here, it is going to give us the selected conversation, and inside that state we had the user ID, and that's what we'll be calling. So we will say selected conversation dot underscore ID. Then this is going to be the post method. So method will be post, and headers application JSON, and then body will be this message where we just stringify it, and that's gonna be it. We will say const data and just extract it, and if there is data.error, as always, we'll just throw that and we'll catch it under this inside the catch block. But otherwise, we'll just say set messages, and here this is how we would use it. So inside the use conversation, this was accepting messages, the new state, and we will just pass it, and that's gonna update our state. So we will have all the previous messages, and then we will just add the new message, which is this data or data. So that's gonna be it. I think we, under this file, we'll just say return send message function in the loading state, and I have a typo here, and with this I think that should be completed. Let's go here and just try to consume this function. So form, we will say on submit, we would like to call the handle submit function that will create, and let's create it, and let's say event.prevent default. We would like to have one state, let's say message set message, and we will bind it to this input, so value and on change. Then we would like to call our hook. That's going to give us the values. So const give us the loading and send message function. This is going to be an async function, and let's say first, let's just say if this input is empty, so user shouldn't be able to just leave it empty and then just spam messages. So we're not gonna allow it. So we'll say if there is not message, then just return, don't run this function. So but if there is message, let's say await send message, call this function with the input message, and if this is successfully completed, then set message to the empty string again. And we would like to use the loading state. Again, we could go into this button, and here I think I'll just copy and paste it. So we say if it is loading, show this loading spinner, but else show the this icon. Let's save and test it out, and it's gonna work now. So I would like to send a message to John. I will say, hello John, it's me from, or let's just say hello from client. And if I send it now, we have the loading state, and now it has been successfully completed. Let's just double check it. Inside the messages in our database, we said hello from client, and it has just been sent. And now I hope it is really clear that our code base is super clean, where we just have a function that does everything for us, and our code is really readable. So we say when we submit this form, call this handle submit, where it is gonna just send the message for us, and if it is successfully completed, then we will set the state to be empty. And that's the beauty of hooks. That's why we always use it in our projects. And now the other hook that we'd like to add will be getting messages. So use get messages.js, and we'll add our logic now. So refce, and then I'll just do the boilerplate thing that we always do. So we have the loading state, and now again we would like to use the messages, but this time it is going to be coming from use conversation. And let's get those values. It is going to be the messages, set messages, and then selected conversation. So I think we just did the exact same thing in this file, right? Because we used all those values. And now we will have not a function, but this time we'll have a use effect, because this should immediately run when we call this hook. So here we'll just say a function const get messages. Let's say it's going to be async, and then try catch, and let's have a finally, and then we would like to say set loading to be true, and set loading will be false. Toast.error, error.message, and in the try, let's just say const res await fetch. So it's going to be API messages, and we didn't have the get, but it was just the ID. So do you remember how we have it? So API slash messages slash the ID to get the messages, and this ID was the user that would like to fetch our messages. So we'll just say, let's close this one, and then so that's going to be the selected conversation dot underscore ID, and this is a get method, so we don't need to add any options. So const data await res JSON, and if there is any errors, we'll just throw that and catch it in the catch block, but otherwise we'll just say set messages to be this data, and then let's call this function, but we will only call this if there is a selected conversation. So if selected conversation dot underscore ID, and since this can be null, let's put a question mark so that our application doesn't break, and then we will just go and say selected conversation dot underscore ID. Whenever this selected conversation ID changes, run this use effect, and this wants us to add the set messages, and this is never going to change, but it still wants it. So lastly, at the end of this file, we'll just say return the messages as well as the loading state. And now we could save this file, and let's close this. We're going to go into the, let's say, message container we had, and inside we have the messages. So it's going to be this component where we will call our hook. So let's say const and just get the use get messages. Now that's going to return us the messages as well as the loading state. And before we do anything, let's just console log the messages. So let's say console log messages, and we could say something like messages, and then let's just save it. Let's go. I will refresh this page, open up my console. Now we don't have anything, but if we click to this, now we have one message that we sent from client. Now I'll say hello John. I'll just send the second message, and let's send another one. Now do you see how it has been updated immediately? Here we can see hello John 2, and then let's send another one, and then let's say hello John 4. Now let's refresh this page again. Here we can see we got all of the messages, and now we would like to just render them. So let's go into the messages, and here instead of returning these, let's delete them. And now we have the loading state, and for this we would like to show a loading skeleton. So when it is in the loading state, we could have this kind of loading skeleton, and for this we could check the Daisy UI where they have the skeletons, and that's basically the component that we have. You could copy the code and paste it, but I already prepared one for you, so you can grab that from the GitHub repo, and I will go and just create that component. So I will say skeletons, and I'll say message skeleton.jsx, and I'll just paste that file. So now I will paste it, and we will try to consume it inside this file. So we'll say if it is loading, then we are going to call this skeleton file 3 times. So I think I could copy that line and just paste it. So here we'll just say if it is loading 3 times, just so this is basically 3 for loops, just map this message skeleton. And now if we save, let's refresh, let's see the output. Let's refresh this page. If I click to that, we have 1 second of that loading state, and we see that 3 times. It's because so this one and this one is in that file, and we rendered this 3 times so that we got 1, 2, and then 3. So that's the gist of it. Then we could also show something like if it is not loading and there is not any messages, we will just say send a message to start the conversation. So it is going to be just like this. where we select the Felix, we don't have any messages. So in this chat, we don't have any messages. So we just show send a message to start the conversation. And for this, again, I will copy one line and just paste it. So we say if it is not loading and there is not any messages, so just show this paragraph. And let's save. And if we click to this, now it says send a message to start the conversation. And again, we have 1 second of loading state, and then it says send a message to start the conversation. Now, other side, other than these if checks, we are gonna render our messages. So I think I could copy and paste it, or let's just type it out. Okay, so after the loading, or maybe before them, okay, we have the loading states in this edge cases. We will say if it is not loading and messages length is greater than 0, then we'll just return our messages. So we'll say, but first we need to say messages.map, and okay, sorry about that, that should be something like this, messages.map, and get each message. This copilot can get a bit annoying, so we will return a message component. Let's get this. We're gonna have a key as well as the message itself, and we're gonna go into the message component and just take it as a prop and just render it now. So we will get the message. So we will check if this message is from us or from the other user, and for this we can use our auth state. So that's gonna be coming from use auth context, and let's say auth user, and then inside, so that was the authenticated user we were getting from the context. I just wanted to mention. Now we will say also get the use conversation. That was the Zustand state. So let's say selected conversation. And now we'll just check if this message is from me. So const from me. So we will say, so this is going to be equal to if message dot sender ID is equal to the auth user underscore ID. And if we check the console, here we can see inside each message we have that field called sender ID, receiver ID, and that's because we have populated this when we were building the backend part. I hope you guys remember that. And now we have the from me. This is going to be true if this condition is correct. Now we will add one class name that is either going to be, so it's going to be like this. So it is going to be either in the chat start or end, and we will check it depending on this class. So let's say const, so chat class name, and we'll just say if it is from me, then it is going to be chat end, but if it is not from me, then it's going to be chat start. And then we will show the profile pic, but again, that's going to be dynamic. So if message is from me, then we're going to show our profile picture, but otherwise the other user profile picture. So we could say const profile pic, and we will say if it is from me, then auth user dot profile pic, but otherwise we will just say selected conversation dot profile pic, and let's just put this optional chaining. And then what should we add next? We are gonna add the background color. So if the message is from us, we're gonna show this blue color. So let's say bubble BG color. So it is from me. Then I'll just show background blue 500, but otherwise it is not gonna have any background color. And we're getting to the end. And lastly, now we will fix this timing, and I think I'll do that in a second. But for now, we could just add everything step by step. So instead of this chat end value, let's make it dynamic. I will delete this part, open up curly braces, backticks, that was chat, and then this part will be dynamic, where we have the chat class name. And then for the image source, we will delete this part, and we'll just say it is going to be this profile pic. So let's delete this part, format it. And then for this chat bubble, we will add this, let's see, it's gonna be this bubble BG color. So again, dynamic value, paste it. And then we have this value as the message content, and that's gonna be message.message. And again, if we just check it from the console, here we can see, so sender ID, receiver ID, and then we have the message, that is the message content. And that's same for each message. Okay, we're gonna get that. And we're just returning that inside here. And I think that's gonna be it for now. Let's save and hopefully that's gonna work fine. So these are all of our messages. Let's send another. And here we can see it is also here. And now let's log in as John and let's try to send a message to this user. Let's say John Doe, and that was our password. Oh, okay. So I think our password is wrong. I'll just do it again. Okay, we cannot log in. Maybe that username is not correct. Let's see. Inside the users, we had the John Doe, and for some reason it doesn't take us to inside. So John Doe. That's strange. So it says invalid username or password. And it's maybe because we didn't hash this and now we are trying to compare this by hashing. Okay, so if we try to log in as Bob, now that's gonna work. So it is currently we're having a problem while trying to log in is because we didn't hash this password and now we are trying to compare a hash with a non-hashed password, and that's the reason. So I'll log in as Bob, and here we have logged in. Let's send message to this user. Hey. Okay, so we have all of our messages, and let's go back into this account. And that was Bob. Now let's say hello. Oh, okay, so we have still the same background color, but we'll fix it. Okay, so why that is, we say chat class name. Okay, it is this one, bubble BG color. Oh, we need to just delete it. Okay, if we delete this one, now it is going to be dynamic. Okay, so if it is from us, we see this color, but otherwise we see this color. And now if we try to just render this time, let's go and delete this one. If we say something like message that created add field, that's gonna look a bit ugly, and it's because this is how MongoDB stores our data, or the created add field. And for this we could create a function called extract time. So I will go into the utils and create that file, extract time.js, and I will provide this function to you. So basically copy it and paste it from the GitHub repo, and that's gonna be it. I just got this from ChatGPT. So you just call this function with the MongoDB date string, and it returns you in this format hours and minutes. Now we will go into our message, and here let's just say formatted date, formatted time, let's say, and then we'll call the extract time and message that created that. And now this has been formatted, and we will just return this value. And if we save now, here we can see this is the time that message has been sent. It is 4 a.m. in the morning. Yeah, we are still recording. But yeah, that's gonna be it. Okay, so we have this problem now. So let's send some messages. Okay, we already have. Now I'll just send a couple of more. Now here, when we send a message, it doesn't scroll for us till the very end, or when we select this chat, it should scroll us automatically until the end. And we can do this by using useEffect. Now we will go into the messages component. So here, let's just delete this comment, and we will say useEffect. Now here we would like to have a reference. So let's say const last message ref, and we'll just say use ref and call it. By default it could be null. So here, instead of returning the message immediately, let's return actually a div so that we could put that ref into it. So you will understand in a second. Now I will send this message inside, and instead of passing this key into the message, we'll just pass it to the div, and we'll just say last, or the ref will be just last message ref. And so since this has been added to each message, we could do something like last message ref dot current scroll into view, and the behavior should be smooth. And if we save now, and it's gonna automatically just scroll for us till the very end. It didn't work is because sometimes it is because of the rendering timing, and I'll just cut this. If we put it into a set timeout, this is the solution that I came up with, and that's, I think, something common. So we'll just put something like 100 milliseconds or maybe 50 milliseconds. We'll just delay this, and that should hopefully work now. Let's go here. If we click that, okay, it still didn't work out. Let's see why that is. So we will say whenever the messages changes, run this use effect. And let's do it now. Okay, it scrolls for us. And what happens if we delete this set timeout? Is it still gonna work? So it doesn't. That's why that set timeout is actually needed. And now it actually works for us. And even if we send another one, that's gonna scroll for us till the very end. But now we can't really see the sent date of this message, and we could fix it by adding some padding. So into the message, let's say padding bottom of 1 or maybe 2, how that's gonna look like. Okay, now that just fixed it, and we are able to see the latest messages time. And now let's not forget the search functionality. For this, we're gonna go into the search input component, and here we have an input. So let's create a state for this. So that could be search, and we will import the use state. So let's just bind it. Value will be search, and on change we'll just update this state. And then we would like to have an on submit event. So handle submit function. So I'll copy this and create it. I'll just say event.prevent default, and here we're going to be using the Zustand global state. So const that was use conversation, and we're going to get the set selected conversation, and we'll see why. And also we would like to get the use get conversations, and we'll just get all of them. So const, we'll say conversations. So when we submit this form, first let's just check if there is not search, then we could just return. We'll not do anything, and we'll say if search dot length is less than 3, then we could say toast dot error, and we'll do something like search term must be at least 3 characters long. And let's import this and return out of this function after we show the toast. But if it was successful, then we will try to find this conversation. So if I search something like John, then I would like to find John in this chat, and the first one that match, I would like to select it. And for this, we could use a search algorithm that is super basic. So let's say const conversation. We're gonna go and find inside the entire conversations array. So conversations.find, get the each conversation, and each conversation had a full name value, right? So we're gonna say full name and just lowercase it. And the reason that we are lowercasing it is because, let's say if we search something like John, but this part is uppercase, but this one is lowercase, then this is not gonna match with this one. And that's why we just make this entirely lowercase, and also we lowercase this one so that they match. So that's going to be something like John Doe. Even if we type it like this, oops. So if we type it like this, our code will make it to look like this, and then it is gonna do the exact same thing for this one, and it is gonna compare them. So that's the idea. I hope I explained this clearly. And then let's say if it includes the search case, and we're just gonna lowercase that as well so that they're gonna match. And then lastly, we'll say if there is conversation, we will update our state. So set selected conversation to this one, and we could update the search with an empty string, but else case, we'll just say toast.error and no such user found. And let's test it out now. We're gonna go here, and if we just put something like less than 3 characters, it's gonna give us this error. And if we just put something that is not in our database, it's gonna say no such user found. But if we search for something like test account and search it, it's gonna update it and select this conversation for us. And let's select Daisy, and it's gonna get us this one, and it's just gonna work for each user. And that wraps our search functionality. So with this, we have completed this part as well. I will commit the changes, and in the next part, we will add a Scikit.io into our application. And that's going to be for real-time events. So I will see you in the next section.